A blind millionaire wakes up injured and without memory in a landfill until a poor girl finds him. As he tries to remember who he is, he finds shelter with a humble family and chooses to sell his valuable watch to save them. When his memories return, he goes back to his old life, not for revenge but to face the truth with a changed heart. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. And now, back to our story. The heat was suffocating. Not the clean, crisp heat of a summer day at the beach, but a sticky warmth that carried the sour stench of decay. Ryan Miller didn't know where he was. He didn't even know who he was. His consciousness surfaced slowly, like a diver rising from deep, murky waters, fighting to reach the air. Every movement sent a sharp jolt of pain through his body, a reminder that something terrible had happened. He tried to open his eyes, but all he could see was a reddish blur, as if the entire world were veiled in blood and fire. The late afternoon light pierced his compromised vision, creating distorted shapes that danced meaninglessly. Ryan had always been blind, but never like this. His blindness was an old, familiar companion, something he had learned to live with. But now, on top of the usual darkness, there was confusion, disorientation, and a silent terror climbing up his throat. The ground beneath his hands was uneven and damp, torn plastic, soaked cardboard, something. Slimy he preferred not to identify. The air was thick with flies. He could hear them buzzing around him, insistent, hungry. And there was another sound too, a sound that made his heart pound, the hoarse cawing of vultures. They were close, very close. Ryan tried to move, but his legs wouldn't respond properly. A wave of violent nausea rose from his stomach, and he turned his head to the side, spitting out a bitter liquid that burned his throat. Fragments of thought shot through his mind like stray sparks. A champagne flute, the golden glint of a liquid. Laughter. A familiar voice saying something he couldn't quite remember. And then nothing. A black hole where a memory should be. Where am I? He thought, trying to control the rising panic. What happened to me? That's when he heard the footsteps. Light, almost imperceptible over the drone of the flies and the vultures. Barefoot steps on trash. Ryan froze, every muscle tensed, his survival instinct screaming louder than reason. Whoever it was, they were getting closer. The voice that followed was thin, childlike, but it carried a surprising determination. "Mister, you alive?" Ryan tried to answer, but his voice came out as a ragged whisper. I don't know." The little girl moved closer. He felt a small hand touch his shoulder gently, as if afraid he might shatter at the slightest contact. "You gotta get out of here. The gangs come through here at night. If they find you with that watch, they'll take everything." "Watch?" Ryan brought a trembling hand to his wrist, and sure enough felt the cool, heavy metal of a watch. His fingers traced its smooth surface, recognizing the expensive shape, the significant weight. It was gold, real gold. How could someone like him, dumped in a landfill like a piece of trash, have something so valuable? "I can't remember," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't know what happened. I don't know who I am." The girl was silent for a moment, as if processing this information. "Doesn't matter right now. You gotta get up. I'll help you." She slipped her arm under his with a strength that was surprising for someone so small. Ryan groaned in pain as he leaned on her, but he managed to get to his knees. The world was spinning. The smell was unbearable. But the girl didn't give. "Come on, mister, slow, we're gonna get out of here." With a massive effort, Ryan managed to stand. His legs trembled like thin branches in the wind, threatening to give out at any moment. The girl held him steady, guiding his steps through mountains of garbage. He could hear the rustle of plastic bags, the crunch of broken bottles under his bare feet. Wait, bare feet? He glanced down, but his blurry vision couldn't make out the details. His shoes were gone. Whoever had left him here had shown no mercy. How long it took to cross that sea? Of refuse, Ryan couldn't say. It could have been minutes or hours. The pain in his body was a constant dull hum that never ceased. But the girl pressed on, determined, whispering words of encouragement whenever he threatened to collapse. Finally, the smell began to change. It was still strong, still unpleasant, but it was different, The smell of a charcoal grill, the smell of food cooking, the smell of life happening, however difficult it might be. "We're almost there," the girl said. "My grandma lives right up ahead." Ryan heard voices around them, kids running, laughing, the sound of a radio blasting hip-hop, the creak of an old door. They were in a community. The projects, he realized, recognizing the familiar sounds any New Yorker would know, even if they'd never set foot in one. The girl led him to a small apartment building. The door groaned as it opened, and Ryan smelled a closed, damp but clean space. There was effort here, care, even in the midst of poverty. "Grandma," the girl called out. "Grandma, I brought someone. He needs help." An older voice, raspy from too many cigarettes or too much living, answered cautiously. "Isabella, what have you gotten yourself into now?" Isabella. So that was the name of the girl who had saved him. "I found him in the dump, Grandma. He's all beat up and doesn't remember anything." Ryan heard heavy footsteps approaching. He felt a steady gaze on him, even without being able to see it clearly. The grandmother was sizing him up, calculating the risk of bringing a stranger into her home. "Ma'am," he began, his voice weak, "I don't know what happened to me, but I swear I'm not dangerous. I need a place to rest. Just until I can figure things out." The silence that followed was heavy. Ryan felt his fate being decided in that moment. If the old woman sent him away, he wouldn't have the strength to go far. He'd end up back at the dump, and there the vultures would finish what someone else had started. "Get in," the voice finally said, resigned but not cold. "But if I see anything funny, you're out on your ear. Got it?" "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you." Isabella guided him to a corner of the room where there was what felt like an old mattress on the floor. Ryan let himself collapse onto it, every muscle in his body screaming with relief. The girl brought him water in a dented metal cup, and he drank it as if he'd never tasted anything so good. The grandmother approached with a basin and some cloths. She began to clean his wounds without much ceremony, but with a gentle touch that revealed years of experience caring for hurt people. "You took a bad beating," she commented as she cleaned a cut on his forehead. "Or fell from a high place. You're lucky to be alive." "I don't remember," Ryan repeated, the frustration clear in his voice. "It's like someone erased everything." "Memory comes back," the old woman said with the wisdom of someone who'd seen it all. "Sometimes it takes a while, but it comes back. In the meantime, you're going to lie still and heal. My name is Mrs. Peterson, and this here is my granddaughter, Isabella." "Ryan," he said, surprised at how easily the name came to him. "My name is Ryan." "At least you remember that much," Mrs. Peterson replied with a hint of dry humor. Isabella sat near him, her legs crossed, her curious eyes fixed on his face. "Mister, why do you have such an expensive watch?" the girl asked with the bluntness of a child. Ryan touched the watch on his wrist again. It was a heavy, solid piece. Even without his memory, he knew it was worth a fortune. More than most people in this neighborhood would make in years of work. "I don't know," he answered honestly, "but it might be the only clue I have about who I used to be." "Used to be," Mrs. Peterson repeated, pausing her work. "So you know you're not him anymore." The words fell on Ryan like stones. She was right. Whoever he was before, that person had been left to rot in a landfill. That person was dead to the world. And he now was just a man with no past, no identity, depending on the kindness of strangers to survive another day. Night fell over the neighborhood, bringing a chill that contrasted with the day's suffocating heat. Ryan remained on the thin mattress, listening to the sounds of life happening around him, children being called inside, pots and pans clattering, loud conversations, music, laughter. It was a world completely different from anything he could remember. Isabella had prepared a plate of rice and beans, simple but served with care. Ryan ate slowly, each spoonful tasting more delicious than it should have. There was a hunger in him that went beyond an empty stomach. It was a hunger for connection, for belonging, for being a part of something. Mrs. Peterson sat in an old armchair watching him eat. "Tomorrow you're going to have to start pulling your weight," she said bluntly. "I can't afford to feed another mouth." "If you're staying, you're helping," Ryan nodded. "I'll help with whatever you need." The old woman nodded, satisfied. There's water to haul from the hydrant down the block. There's wood to chop for the grill. There are 1,000 things to fix in this apartment. Your hands will learn, even if they've never done it before. How do you know I've never done manual labor? Mrs. Peterson let out a short laugh. I can tell by looking at your hands, mister. Those are the hands of someone who's always had people do things for him. Ryan looked at his own hands. Even with his blurry vision, he could see they were slender, well cared for. Or at least they had been, before the dump. Now they were scratched and dirty, but they still betrayed a life of comfort. That night, lying on the thin mattress, Ryan tried to force his memory to return. He closed his eyes and searched the depths of his mind for something, anything, that made sense. And that's when the images started to come. Fragments at first. A huge ballroom with crystal chandeliers, people in expensive clothes, glasses in hand. He was there. He could feel it. He was at the center of it all, being watched. There was a woman by his side. He couldn't see her face, but he felt her presence. Familiar, intimate, important. And then the glass, golden, filled with an amber liquid. Someone placing it in his hand. A voice saying something. A toast. Laughter. And then the taste. Bitter. Strange. Wrong. Ryan woke with a start, his heart racing, his breath coming in short gasps. What had happened in that ballroom? Why did that memory bring with it a sense of betrayal so deep it was physically painful? Beside him, Isabella stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Mrs. Peterson snored softly in the opposite corner of the room. Ryan forced himself to take a deep breath, to calm his heart. The answers would come. He had to believe that. The answers would come. Morning arrived with the sound of distant sirens and the noise of the neighborhood waking up. Ryan got up slowly, every muscle protesting. He was stiff and sore, but better than the night before. Mrs. Peterson was already up, making coffee on a makeshift stove. "Morning," she said without turning around. "There's coffee and toast. Eat up, then you're coming with me to get water." Ryan ate in silence, watching Isabella get ready for school. The girl wore a mended but clean uniform, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Before leaving, she came over to him. "Mister, don't tell anyone about the watch, okay? People around here are good, but there are some you can't trust." Ryan nodded, silently thanking her for her concern. "I won't. And Isabella, thank you for finding me, for bringing me here. You saved me." The girl smiled, a wide grin that lit up her thin face. "It was nothing. We help people who need it, right? That's what Grandma taught me." And with that she ran off, her worn-out backpack bouncing on her shoulders. Mrs. Peterson handed Ryan 2 old buckets. "Let's go. The fire hydrant is down the block. Today you're going to learn what real life is like." Ryan followed the old woman through the narrow alleyways of the project. The sun was already strong, and he felt the heat on his face. People greeted them along the way, looking curiously at the strange man walking beside Mrs. Peterson. He kept his head down, trying not to draw attention. The hydrant was a rusty fixture on the corner, surrounded by worn concrete. There was a special wrench to open it. Mrs. Peterson showed him how to attach the hose, fill the buckets, and carry them back. It looked simple, but when Ryan tried, he discovered it was grueling work. His arms shook with the effort, his unaccustomed hands slipped on the handles. "Slowly," the old woman instructed. "No need to rush. Better to do it right than to do it fast and spill everything." Ryan filled the 2 buckets and began the walk back. The water was heavy, much heavier than he'd imagined. His back ached, his shoulders burned, but he didn't stop, he didn't complain. There was a strange pride in it, a satisfaction in completing a task so simple yet so essential. Back at the apartment, Mrs. Peterson put him to work fixing a leak in the ceiling. Ryan climbed onto a wobbly chair, trying to patch the hole with an old piece of tarp. His hands were clumsy, the hammer heavy and hard to control. But slowly, with patience and a few missed swings, he got it done. "You learn fast," Mrs. Peterson commented, a hint of approval in her voice. "Maybe you're good for something after all." Ryan smiled for the first time in days. It was a small compliment, but it meant everything. The days began to fall into a pattern: wake up early, get water, help with chores around the apartment, talk with Isabella when she got home from school, eat whatever was available, always simple, but made with care, sleep on the thin mattress, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood quieting down. And every night, the memories came, always fragmented, always confusing, but slowly they were forming a picture. Ryan started to remember a name: Melissa. That was the name of the woman who had been by his side in that ballroom. Melissa, his wife. He also remembered another name: Frank, his best friend, or at least he had been. The memories brought sensations: the glass in his hand, the bitter taste, the laughter that seemed so distant. And then, darkness, someone carrying him, the smell of the dump. And then, waking up among vultures. Ryan began to understand what had happened. Slowly, painfully, the pieces fit together. He had been poisoned, left to rot, discarded like trash by people he trusted. But why? That was the question that tormented him. Why would Melissa and Frank do this? What did they have to gain? One afternoon, while helping Mrs. Peterson hang clothes on a makeshift line, two men walked past the building. Ryan heard their low voices, but they were loaded with intent. "That's the guy Mrs. Peterson took in, right?" "Yeah. They say he's got a gold watch. Think it's worth a look?" The men moved on, but the threat lingered in the air. Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. He was putting Mrs. Peterson and Isabella in danger. His presence here, with that valuable watch, was like a beacon attracting trouble. Isabella noticed his tension when she got home from school. Without a word, she started singing loudly, a silly song he had taught her a few days earlier. She sang so loud that the men who had been loitering nearby left, annoyed by the noise. Ryan understood what the girl was doing. She was protecting him in the only way she could. That night he made a decision. He couldn't stay hidden forever. He couldn't keep putting these two women at risk. But he wasn't ready yet either. He needed to fully recover his memory. He needed to understand everything before confronting what had been done to him. The watch on his wrist was the key. It was proof of who he was. And maybe it would also be the price he had to pay to protect the people who had saved him. Ryan touched the cool metal, feeling its weight. Soon, he would have to make a choice. But for now, in that moment, in that humble apartment with its leaky ceiling and old furniture, he was more alive than he had ever been. And for the first time since waking up in the dump, Ryan Miller truly smiled. The weeks passed slowly in, the community that had become Ryan Miller's unlikely refuge. Each day brought new discoveries about a world he had never truly known, despite having lived his entire life in New York City. The city he remembered was one of skyscrapers, expensive restaurants, and private drivers. But this New York, the one of narrow alleyways and cramped apartments, was completely different. And strangely, it felt more real. Ryan had become part of the household routine. He'd wake before sunrise, help Mrs. Peterson light the old gas stove and make coffee while she laid out Isabella's uniform. Then he'd go get water from the hydrant, a task his soft hands had learned to perform efficiently. The calluses forming on his palms were silent medals of his apprenticeship. Ryan looked at them with a strange, almost childish pride. They were proof that he was capable of doing something useful, something real. His memory continued to return in pieces. Some nights were worse than others. Ryan would wake up in a sweat, his heart pounding, fragments of conversations echoing in his mind. He remembered more details now: the penthouse where he lived, the scent of expensive perfume Melissa wore, Frank's booming laugh, always present at parties, always by his side. Or rather, always a little too close to Melissa. How had he not seen it? How had he been so blind, beyond his physical disability? The signs had probably all been there. The exchanged glances, the conversations that stopped abruptly when he entered a room, the business trips Frank took that coincided with Melissa's absences. It had all been right in front of him, and he had seen nothing. One morning, while fixing the wooden fence around Mrs. Peterson's small community garden plot, Ryan heard familiar voices. Isabella was coming home from school, earlier than usual, accompanied by other children. They were chattering excitedly about a school project, something about family and life stories. "Grandma," Isabella called as she entered the small yard. "Can we use your story for our school project? The teacher asked us to write about someone important in our lives." Mrs. Peterson, who was sifting through a bag of dried beans on the doorstep, gave a short laugh. "My story's nothing special, child. It's the same as everyone else's around here. Worked my whole life, raised my kids alone, and now I'm taking care of my granddaughter because her mother took off." Isabella sat beside her grandmother, her eyes shining. "But I think it's special, Grandma. You always say we have to help others, even when we have almost nothing. Like with Mr. Ryan. You brought him home without even knowing him." Ryan stopped hammering, his heart tightening. He had grown so used to this routine that he'd almost forgotten he didn't belong here, that he was an intruder, a burden. Mrs. Peterson was silent for a moment, her wrinkled face thoughtful. "I brought him in because it was the right thing to do, Isabella. Your mother taught me that before she left, that we might not have money, but we can always have kindness, and kindness doesn't cost a thing." The words hit Ryan like a punch to the gut. He dropped the hammer and stood up, walking over to where they were sitting. Mrs. Peterson looked up at him with that direct gaze of hers. "Sorry for listening in," Ryan said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I need you both to know how grateful I am. More than I can say. You saved me. You gave me a roof over my head. You treated me like family when I had nothing." Mrs. Peterson waved her hand as if shooing away a fly. "Enough of that sentimental nonsense, mister. You've paid your keep helping around here. Now go finish that fence before it gets dark." But there was a different glint in the old woman's eyes, a warmth she tried to hide behind her gruff exterior. Ryan smiled and went back to work, his heart lighter. That night, after Isabella had fallen asleep and Mrs. Peterson had retired to her corner, Ryan lay awake, staring at the ceiling with its patched-up leaks. The memories were coming stronger, now clearer. He remembered the day he met Melissa. It was at an art gallery opening, a charity event where he had donated a significant sum. She was beautiful, charming, knew exactly what to say. And he, a man blind since childhood, accustomed to being treated with pity or condescension, had fallen in love with the way she treated him as an equal. Or at least, that's what he'd thought at the time. Frank had been his friend since college. He was there when Ryan inherited the family fortune. He was there when he started investing and multiplying that money. He was there for every achievement, every celebration. And he was there when Ryan married Melissa, the best man at the wedding. Of course he was. Ryan closed his eyes, fighting the rage that burned in his chest. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the humiliation, the fact that everyone probably knew, the staff, the business partners, maybe even his own daughter, Julia, that was her name, his daughter. The memory came like a lightning bolt, sharp and painful. Julia was 15 when he was left in the dump. A quiet girl, always on her phone, always distant. Ryan had tried to get closer, but she had built walls so high he'd given up trying to climb them. Did Julia miss him? Or had she believed whatever story Melissa and Frank had concocted about his disappearance? The thought was unbearable. The next morning, Ryan woke with renewed determination. He needed to recover completely. He needed to get strong. And then, when he was ready, he would go back. Not for the assets, not for the fortune, but for the truth. And for justice. Mrs. Peterson noticed the change in him. "You're different today," she commented as they made coffee together. "Your thoughts gone back to where you came from?" Ryan nodded. "They're coming back, the memories, and they're not good." The old woman took 2 old mugs and poured the strong black coffee. "Bad memories are like splinters, mister. The more you poke at them, the more they hurt. But if you don't pull them out, they'll get infected." "I need to pull these splinters out," Ryan said, sipping the hot coffee. "I need to go back there. Face what happened." Mrs. Peterson studied him with her piercing gaze. "You're really going to do it, aren't you? Go. Back to that world of rich folks and their rich folk problems." "It's not about that," Ryan protested. "It's about the truth, about not letting bad people get away with what they did." "And then what?" the old woman asked. "After you've had your say, gotten your revenge, what will you do? Go back to being who you were?" Ryan fell silent. It was a good question. Who would he be after? The man who was left to rot in a dump, or the blind millionaire who trusted the wrong people? "I don't know," he finally admitted, "but I know I can't stay here forever. I can't keep putting you in danger because of that watch." Mrs. Peterson snorted. "That watch has been here for weeks, and nothing's happened. The men who were hanging around left after they saw Isabella screamed every time they got too close. You're not as important as you think you are." Ryan smiled despite the seriousness of the moment. Mrs. Peterson had a gift for deflating his ego whenever it got too big. The days continued to pass, but now with a different urgency. Ryan worked harder, helped more, as if trying to repay a debt. He could never fully settle. He taught Isabella more complex math to help with her homework. He fixed the roofs of 3 other apartments in the building. He helped a neighbor install a makeshift TV antenna. People began to know him by name, Mr. Ryan, the blind man who was good with his hands. Ryan, who always had a smile and a kind word. Ryan, who helped Mrs. Peterson when she needed it. He was becoming part of this community. And that, in a way, was more frightening than comforting, because it meant one more thing to lose when he inevitably had to leave. It was on a rainy Thursday that everything changed. Mrs. Peterson had left early to clean a house in the next neighborhood over. Isabella was at school. Ryan was home alone, trying to patch a hole in a pot, when he felt a sharp pain in his chest. It wasn't a physical pain, it was something worse. It was intuition, a premonition. Something was wrong. He dropped the pot and went out into the small yard, the light rain wetting his face. The sky was grey, heavy, threatening. And then he heard it. In the distance, shouting, people running, desperate voices. Ryan followed the sounds, his bare feet slipping in the mud. His heart was hammering against his ribs. Something had happened, something bad. When he reached the source of the commotion, he found a group of people gathered in front of an apartment. A woman was crying loudly, holding a child in her arms. A man was yelling for help. And in the center of it all, passed out on the muddy ground, was Mrs. Peterson. Ryan pushed through the crowd, kneeling beside the old woman. Her face was pale, her lips purple. She wasn't breathing right. "What happened?" Ryan yelled to anyone who would listen. "She just collapsed," a woman answered. "She was working and just fell over. I think it's her heart." Heart. The word echoed in Ryan's mind like a funeral bell. Mrs. Peterson had a heart condition. She had mentioned it once in passing, but never made a big deal of it, said it was just old age and she'd keep going as long as God allowed. But now, lying there in the mud, she looked so fragile, so small, so human. "Did anyone call an ambulance?" Ryan asked, his voice desperate. The people around him exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one had a phone, and even if they did, ambulances took forever to get here. Or they didn't come at all. Not for people like them. Ryan made a decision. "Help me lift her," he commanded. "I'm taking her to the hospital." "Mister, you can't," a man said. "The hospital's miles away, and you can barely see." "I can do it," Ryan said, with a firmness he didn't know he possessed. "I have to." With the help of 2 men, Ryan lifted Mrs. Peterson. She was lighter than he expected, her body worn out from a lifetime of hard work. He held her against his chest, feeling her faint breath on his neck. "Tell me the way," he said. "I'll walk. You guys guide me." And so began the longest journey of Ryan's life. Step by step, through the rain that was now falling hard, he carried Mrs. Peterson. The people from the community formed a kind of chain, each one guiding him for a stretch, passing him on to the next when they got tired. "Turn left here. Watch out for the pothole. Straight ahead, keep going straight." The voices, mixed with the sound of the rain and distant thunder. Ryan didn't feel the weight in his arms. He didn't feel the pain in his back. He felt nothing but the urgent need to save the woman who had given him a chance when he was nothing. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably 40 minutes, they reached the hospital. An old building with peeling paint and endless lines. Ryan burst through the emergency room doors, still carrying Mrs. Peterson. "Help!" he shouted. "She needs help now!" Doctors and nurses rushed over, taking the old woman from his arms and placing her on a gurney. They started working immediately, connecting wires, administering drugs, shouting medical terms Ryan didn't understand. He fell to his knees right there in the hallway, shivering from cold and exhaustion. His clothes were soaked, his hands were shaking uncontrollably, and for the first time since he'd woken up in the dump, Ryan Miller cried. He cried for the old woman who was fighting for her life because of a heart that was too tired. He cried for Isabella, who would lose the only family she had if Mrs. Peterson didn't make it. He cried for himself, for everything he had lost and for everything he was learning to value far too late. A nurse came over, placing a blanket over his shoulders. "Are you her family?" she asked gently. Ryan looked up at the nurse, his eyes red. "I am," he said. "I'm family." The nurse nodded and walked away. And in that moment, Ryan realized he wasn't lying. Mrs. Peterson and Isabella were his family now, more than Melissa had ever been, more than Frank could ever be. Hours passed. Ryan sat in the cold hospital corridor, refusing to leave. A few people from the community showed up, bringing dry clothes and food. They waited together, a silent vigil. It was almost midnight when the doctor finally appeared, a young man with deep circles under his eyes and a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Her condition is serious," he said without preamble. "Her heart is failing. She needs surgery, more detailed tests, a long-term stay, but all of that is expensive. Can you pay for it?" The question landed like a bomb. The people from the community looked at each other, desperation plain on their faces. No one had that kind of money. No one. Except Ryan. He looked at the watch on his wrist. The gold gleamed even in the dim hospital light. It was heavy. It was valuable. It was the only connection he had to his former life, and it was worth less than nothing compared to a human life. "I can pay," Ryan said, taking the watch off his wrist. "This should cover the costs, and if it's not enough, I'll find a way to get more." The doctor stared at the watch, his eyes wide. Even he, a doctor used to seeing everything, recognized the value of that object. "That's real gold," he said, more a statement than a question. "It is," Ryan confirmed. "Use it to save her. Use it to give her the best possible chance." The doctor took the watch carefully, as if holding something sacred. "I'll do everything I can," he promised. "She's got a fighter on her side." And then he disappeared down the hallway, leaving Ryan sitting there, his wrist bare, feeling the weight of the decision he had made. One of the women from the community came over, her eyes misty. "You gave away the only thing you had," she whispered. "The only link to who you were." Ryan smiled sadly. "I found out who I was, and I discovered I don't much like that person. Maybe it's time to be someone different." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Isabella came running down the hall a few hours later, her eyes red from crying. Someone had picked her up from school and told her what happened. She threw herself into Ryan's arms, sobbing against his chest. "Is Grandma going to be okay?" she asked between sobs. "Please tell me she's going to be okay." Ryan held the girl tight, wishing he could promise, wishing he could guarantee it. But all he could say was, "We're doing everything we can. The doctors are taking care of her, and she's strong. Your grandma is the strongest woman I know." Isabella pulled back a little, looking at Ryan's bare wrist. "You sold the watch?" she asked, her voice small. Ryan nodded. "It was the right thing to do. But it was your only valuable thing." "No, it wasn't," Ryan said, pulling the girl back into a hug. "I have you guys, and that's worth more than all the gold in the world." They stayed there, holding each other in the cold hospital corridor, waiting for news, waiting for a miracle. And for the first time in his life, Ryan Miller prayed. He didn't really know how. He'd never been a religious person. But there, in that moment, he prayed with every fiber of his being. He prayed for a stubborn old woman who had taken him in when he was nothing. He prayed for a little girl who had found him in a dump and saw humanity where others would only see trash. He prayed for a second chance, not for wealth or status, but to be a better person. And as the dawn slowly painted the sky outside, Ryan held Isabella in his arms and waited. He waited with the quiet faith of someone who had nothing left to lose, or perhaps of someone who had finally found something worth fighting to keep. Mrs. Peterson's surgery lasted nearly 6 hours. They were 6 hours of silent agony, of Ryan holding Isabella's trembling hand, of whispered prayers from people who barely knew each other but were united by something bigger than themselves. The hospital waiting room, with its uncomfortable chairs and peeling paint, had become an unlikely sanctuary of hope. When the surgeon finally appeared, still in his scrubs, everyone stood up at once. The silence was so heavy, Ryan could hear his own heart pounding in his ears. "She made it," the doctor said, and it was as if someone had thrown open the windows in a stuffy room. People sighed, some cried, others hugged. The surgery was a success, but she's going to need a long recovery and constant care. Her heart is weak, very weak. Ryan nodded, absorbing every word. "Will she make a full recovery?" The doctor hesitated, and in that pause Ryan understood everything that wasn't being said. With proper care, and by following all our recommendations, she could have many more years. But it won't be like before. She'll need to slow down. No more heavy work. No stress. Isabella squeezed Ryan's hand so hard it hurt. "We'll take care of her," the girl said, with a conviction that belied her age. "We'll do whatever it takes." The doctor smiled, touched by the child's determination. "I'm sure you will. You can see her in a few hours. For now she needs to rest." When they finally let Ryan and Isabella into the room, they found Mrs. Peterson as pale as a sheet, surrounded by tubes and machines that beeped softly. She looked smaller, more fragile, as if the surgery had taken not just the problem from her heart, but also the entire armor of strength she always wore. The old woman's eyes fluttered open at the sound of their footsteps. A faint smile touched her lips when she saw Isabella. "I came to get you, Grandma," the girl said, tears streaming freely. "I came to take you home." Mrs. Peterson reached out her trembling hand, and Isabella took it gently as if it were made of glass. "My little warrior," the old woman whispered, her voice hoarse. "Always so strong." Mrs. Peterson's eyes shifted to Ryan, and there was something different in them. It wasn't just gratitude. It was recognition, as if she were truly seeing him for the first time. "You sold the watch," she said. It wasn't a question. Ryan nodded. "It was the only right thing to do. It was your only link to your old life. Maybe that's why it was so easy to let go." Mrs. Peterson closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, they were misty. "You're a good man, Ryan Miller. It doesn't matter what happened before. It doesn't matter who you were. Today, here, now, you're a good man." The words hit Ryan squarely, because they were the words he needed to hear. Not from Melissa, not from Frank, not from anyone in his past life, but from an old woman who had taken him in and a little girl who had saved him. The following days were a hospital routine. Ryan and Isabella took turns visiting, trying to keep hope alive as Mrs. Peterson slowly regained her strength. The entire community mobilized. Women brought food for Isabella. Men offered to fix things in the apartment that needed attention. It was as if everyone had adopted this small, broken family. It was during one of those nights at the hospital, while Isabella slept in a chair beside her grandmother's bed, that Ryan had his clearest memory yet. It didn't come in fragments. It came whole, vivid, devastating. He was in the study of his penthouse. He remembered the smell of the imported leather armchairs, the smooth touch of the tablet he used for work. Melissa had come in, wearing that expensive perfume he always recognized. Frank was with her. Ryan remembered finding it odd. Why would Frank be there at that hour? "Ryan, darling," Melissa had said in that velvety voice, "I made a special drink for you to celebrate the new contract." "What contract?" Ryan had asked, confused. "The one in Dubai. Frank told me. Congratulations, love." He had accepted the glass. Of course he had. It was his wife, his best friend. Why would he be suspicious? The taste had been strange, bitter, but he drank it anyway, without question. And then everything started to spin. His already limited vision became a complete blur. His legs gave out. He remembered falling, hearing distant laughter. Laughter. They were laughing as the poison did its work. And then, darkness. And then, the dump. Ryan woke up in the hospital chair in a cold sweat. His heart was racing. His hands were shaking. Now he knew. He knew everything. The plan. The betrayal. How they had tried to get rid of him to take everything he had built. Mrs. Peterson was awake, watching him with those eyes that seemed to see right through people. "You remembered," she said simply. Ryan nodded, unable to speak. "And now," she asked, "are you going back? Are you going to get revenge?" "It's not revenge," Ryan said, finding his voice. "It's justice. It's the truth. It's not letting bad people keep doing bad things." Mrs. Peterson was silent for a long moment. "Just don't forget who you are now. Don't let the anger turn you back into what you were before." Ryan looked at the old woman, at Isabella sleeping in the chair, at the simple hospital room where he had spent so many nights, waiting. "I won't forget," he promised. "I will never forget." 3 days later, Mrs. Peterson was discharged. The hospital had kept the watch as payment, but its value had been more than enough to cover all the costs and even leave a small credit for future appointments. Ryan carried the old woman in his arms to the taxi the community had collectively paid for. Everyone had given what they could, even if it was just a few dollars. Back in the simple apartment, with its leaks and worn furniture, Mrs. Peterson finally seemed to relax. Isabella didn't leave her side, bringing her water, fluffing her pillows, telling her stories from school, and Ryan stood there watching this scene of love so pure it ached. But he knew he couldn't stay forever. Not anymore. Now that he had his full memory, he had a responsibility, not just to himself, but to all the other people Melissa and Frank might deceive or harm. That night, after Isabella had finally fallen asleep and Mrs. Peterson was resting peacefully, Ryan left the apartment. He walked through the alleyways of the project, now as familiar as the lines on his own hand. People greeted him, asked about Mrs. Peterson, offered help. He had become part of this place. He had become their Mr. Ryan, the man who helped, who fixed things, who was always there. Ryan reached a payphone at the edge of the neighborhood. He had saved a few quarters for this moment. He dialed the number his newly recovered memory provided, the number of his lawyer, Dr. Paul Davis, a serious, discreet man who had always been loyal. The phone rang 3 times before someone answered. "Hello?" "Dr. Davis," Ryan said, his voice firm. "It's Ryan Miller." The silence on the other end was absolute. Then, a sharp intake of breath. "Ryan, but you're... They said you were..." "They said what, doctor? That I was missing?" The lawyer's voice was a shocked whisper. "Ryan, everyone thinks that you passed away. There was a service. Your wife and Frank, they said you had an accident, that your body was found in a terrible place." Ryan felt the anger burn in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "I need you to come pick me up tomorrow. I'll text you the address and don't tell anyone. Not a soul, doctor, do you? Understand?" "Ryan, what happened? What did they do to you?" "I'll explain everything tomorrow. Just come and bring a notepad. We're going to need to file some reports." After hanging up, Ryan stood there, looking out at the community that had become his home. He knew that when he returned to his old life, everything would change. Not just for him, but for Mrs. Peterson and Isabella too, because he wasn't just going to go back and forget them, not after everything. The next morning, Ryan woke early and made coffee as he always did. Mrs. Peterson was sitting up, in bed, stronger than in previous days, but still frail. "You're leaving today, aren't you?" she asked bluntly. Ryan nodded. "I have to. I need to fix things. But I'll be back. That's a promise." Mrs. Peterson smiled sadly. "You don't have to promise anything, mister. You've already done more for us than you ever had to. You saved my life. You took care of Isabella. You gave us hope." "No," Ryan said, sitting beside her. "You saved me. You showed me what really matters. You taught me how to truly live." Isabella appeared at the door, her eyes puffy. She had overheard the conversation. "You're leaving?" the girl asked, her voice trembling. Ryan held out his arms, and Isabella ran into them, throwing herself into his embrace. "Just for a little while," he promised. "I have things to take care of, but I'll be back. And when I come back, I'm bringing someone for you to meet, my daughter. I think you two will get along." "You have a daughter?" Isabella asked, surprised. "I do. She's 15, and she's probably hurting a lot, thinking I'm gone." "Then you really have to go," Isabella said with the simple wisdom of a child. "She needs you." At 11 o'clock, a gleaming black car pulled up at the entrance to the projects. It was as out of place as a diamond in the mud. People stopped to stare, curious and suspicious. Cars like that didn't show up here for any good reason. Dr. Paul Davis got out of the car, a man in his 60s in an impeccable suit and glasses. His eyes scanned the alley until they found Ryan, who was walking toward him. The lawyer couldn't hide his shock. The man before him was thin, sunburnt, wearing simple mended clothes. But it was undeniably Ryan Miller. "My God," Dr. Davis whispered. "What did they do to you?" Ryan looked back at the apartment where Mrs. Peterson and Isabella were watching from the window. He waved to them, and they both waved back, trying to smile through their tears. "They saved me," Ryan said simply. "They showed me who I really am." In the car, as they drove away from the community, Dr. Davis couldn't stop asking questions. Ryan told him everything. The poisoning, the dump, Isabella finding him, Mrs. Peterson taking him in, the memory loss, the gradual recovery, the sacrifice of the watch. Dr. Davis listened in silence, his face growing paler by the minute. "Ryan, this is attempted murder. It's conspiracy. We need to go straight to the police." "No," Ryan said firmly. "First, we're going to my home. I want to see their faces when they find out I'm alive. I want to hear what they have to say." The lawyer hesitated. "It could be dangerous. If they tried once, they won't try again. Not with you there as a witness. And not after I tell them everything. Trust me, Doctor." The penthouse building appeared on the horizon, an imposing structure of glass and steel. Ryan had forgotten how big it was, how ostentatious. When he lived there, it had been normal. Now, after weeks in a 3-room apartment with leaky pipes, it seemed absurd. The doorman recognized Dr. Davis and let them up. They rode the private elevator to the top floor. Ryan took a deep breath. He was about to confront the 2 greatest traitors of his life. The door was opened by a housekeeper Ryan didn't recognize. The woman looked at them, confused. "Good afternoon, may I help you?" "I'm here to see Melissa." "Miller?" Ryan said, and there was something in his voice that made the woman flinch. "Mrs. Miller is busy at the moment. If you'd like to leave a message—" Dr. Davis stepped forward, showing his bar card. "This isn't a request. It's an urgent matter. Please inform her that Dr. Paul Davis is here, and that I've brought someone she'll want to see." The housekeeper hesitated, but something in the lawyer's serious tone convinced her. She led them into the living room, a space Ryan knew so well. The furniture had been changed. The curtains were different. It was as if Melissa had been erasing every trace of him from the apartment. Hurried footsteps came from the hallway. A woman's voice called out, "Dr. Davis, what is the meaning of this? I was in an important meeting and—" The voice died mid-sentence. Melissa Miller had walked into the room and frozen at the sight of Ryan standing there, very much alive, very real. Her face went white. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked as if she were seeing a ghost, and in a way, she was. "Hi, Melissa," Ryan said calmly. "Surprised to see me?" Another set of footsteps. Frank entered the room talking on his phone. He stopped abruptly when he saw the scene. "Ryan?" His voice was an incredulous whisper. "But you're supposed to be—" "Dead," Ryan finished for him. "Yeah, I thought I would be too. Turns out I'm hard to kill." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Frank's phone clattering onto the marble floor. Melissa was the first to recover from the shock. Her face, moments before pale, regained its color. And it wasn't the color of remorse, it was the color of rage. "How dare You show up here, she spat, the mask of the perfect wife finally falling away. How dare you come back after everything? Ryan almost laughed at her audacity. After everything? You poisoned me, Melissa. You two poisoned me and left me to die in a dump as if I were garbage. And you have the nerve to act like I'm the villain here? Frank finally found his voice. Ryan, I don't know what you think you know, but I know everything, Frank. I remembered every detail. The glass, the bitter taste. Your laughter as I collapsed. You thought you'd get rid of me and take everything. My company, my fortune, my life. Dr. Davis had pulled a small recorder from his pocket, capturing every word. You're being recorded, he warned. Everything you say will be used as evidence. Melissa glanced at the recorder, then at Frank, then back at Ryan, and then something inside her broke. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was the realization that she had lost, but she started to talk. You didn't deserve any of it, she screamed, all her composure gone. A useless blind man who inherited everything without lifting a finger, while I, the one who worked, who tried, was stuck being your nursemaid. Ryan felt the rage, but he kept his cool. So it was about the money. It was always about the money. It was about freedom, Melissa shot back, tears now streaming down her face. About being able to live my life without having to pretend I loved a man who couldn't even see me properly. Every word was a knife, but Ryan didn't let it show. And you, Frank? What was in it for you? Besides my wife, of course. Frank looked like he wanted to disappear. Ryan, it was a mistake. A terrible mistake. A mistake. Ryan took a step toward his former friend. A mistake is forgetting your keys. A mistake is being late. You planned my murder. You poisoned me. You dumped me in a landfill to rot. That's not a mistake. That's pure evil. Frank backed away, his hands trembling. We didn't want you to suffer. The poison was supposed to be fast, painless. But it wasn't, Ryan said, his voice low but charged with emotion. I woke up in the middle of the trash, surrounded by vultures, with no memory, with nothing. Do you know what it's like to wake up not knowing who you are? Not knowing why you're there? Dr. Davis stepped closer, touching Ryan's shoulder. I think we have enough. Let's go to the police. But Ryan wasn't finished yet. Where's Julia? He asked. Where's my daughter? Melissa wiped her tears angrily. She's not here. She's at my mother's, and she won't want to see you. We told her you had an accident, that you suffered. She's already grieved for you. We won't let you destroy her peace. Ryan's heart clenched. His daughter had cried for him. She had suffered, and it was all a lie built by these two people. I'm going to see her, he said firmly, and I'm going to tell her the truth. She deserves to know. You have no proof, Frank said, trying to regain some control. It's your word against ours. Dr. Davis smiled, a smile that was anything but friendly. Actually, with the recorded confession we just obtained, we have more than enough proof. But beyond that, we'll request an exhumation of the body you claimed was Ryan's. We'll investigate every document you signed in his name. We will turn over every stone until the entire truth comes out. Melissa and Frank looked at each other, panic evident in their eyes. You can't do that, Melissa whispered. We can, and we will, Dr. Davis replied, and I suggest you hire good lawyers. You're going to need them. Ryan looked one last time at the two of them, people he had loved, people he had trusted, and he felt only pity, pity for lives so empty they had to destroy others to feel whole. Let's go, Doctor, he said, turning his back. I've seen what I needed to see. As they left the penthouse, Ryan heard Melissa screaming behind them, but he didn't turn around. That chapter of his life was closed. Now he needed to write a new one. In the car, Dr. Davis drove in silence for a few minutes before speaking. Where to now? The police? The hospital, Ryan said. No, wait. My daughter. I want to see my daughter first. She needs to know I'm alive, that her father is back. Melissa's mother lived on the Upper East Side, in an elegant neighborhood. Dr. Davis parked in front of a modern high-rise. Ryan took a deep breath before getting out of the car. He was about to see his daughter again, the little girl he had left behind, even if not by choice. Julia's grandmother answered the intercom, her voice suspicious. When she recognized Dr. Davis, she buzzed them up. But when the apartment door opened and she saw Ryan, she nearly fainted. "That's not possible," she whispered. "You're alive," Ryan finished, "and I need to see Julia, please." The woman hesitated, but something in Ryan's face convinced her. She opened the door fully. "She's in her room, but Ryan, she believes you're gone. This is going to be a shock." "I know, but she deserves the truth." Ryan walked down the hall to the indicated room. He knocked softly on the door. "Julia, it's Dad. Can I come in?" There was absolute silence. Then hurried footsteps. The door flew open, and there she was. Julia, his daughter. Taller than he remembered. Her face more mature. But they were the same eyes. The eyes he had last seen when she was just a few months old, before his blindness became complete. Julia stared at him as if she were seeing a miracle or a nightmare. Her hands flew to her face, trembling. "Dad," her voice was a broken whisper, "but you—" "They said—" "It was a lie," Ryan said, the tears finally falling. "It was all a lie, sweetie. I'm here. I'm alive." Julia took one step toward him, then another, and then she ran, throwing herself into his arms with a force that nearly knocked him over. She was crying uncontrollably, her body shaking with sobs. "I knew it," she said between tears. "I knew something was wrong. The story didn't make sense. But Mom insisted and I—" "It's okay." Ryan held her tight, feeling years of distance dissolve in that hug. "It's okay now, I'm back, and I have so much to tell you." They stayed like that for long minutes, father and daughter reunited after a nightmare that had seemed endless. When they finally separated, Julia held her father's face in her hands, as if needing to make sure he was real. "What happened, Dad? Where have you been?" Ryan sat with her on the bed and began to tell his story. He told her about the poisoning, about waking up in the dump, about Isabella and Mrs. Peterson, about learning to live without a memory, about slowly regaining his identity. He told her everything, sparing no details. Julia listened with wide eyes, her anger growing with each revelation. "Mom did that? And Frank? They tried to kill you?" "They tried, but they didn't succeed, and now they're going to pay for it." Julia hugged her father again, tighter this time. "I'll testify. I'll tell them everything I saw, the lies, the inconsistencies. I'll help you." Ryan smiled, his heart overflowing with pride and love. "Thank you, sweetie. But right now I want you to meet someone, two very special people who helped me when I had nothing." "Who?" "A girl about your age, and her grandmother. They saved me, Julia, they really did. And I think you two will get along great." Julia smiled through her tears. "So when do we get to meet them?" "Soon. Very soon." 3 days later, after giving his statement to the police, after starting the legal process against Melissa and Frank, after beginning to rebuild his life, Ryan returned to the community. But this time, he didn't go alone. Julia was with him, nervous but curious. The contrast between the two realities was stark. Julia, with her designer, clothes and expensive phone, walking through the narrow alleyways where barefoot children played in the street. But she showed no disdain. On the contrary, there was genuine curiosity in her eyes. "This is where you stayed?" she asked, looking around. "This is where I learned to live," Ryan corrected her. They arrived at Mrs. Peterson's apartment. Isabella was in the yard, helping her grandmother hang laundry. When she saw Ryan, her face lit up. "Mr. Ryan's back!" she shouted, running toward him. Ryan caught her in mid-air, spinning her around. Julia watched the scene with a smile. "Isabella," Ryan said, putting the girl down. "This is Julia, my daughter. Julia, this is Isabella, the girl who found me in the dump and saved me." The two girls looked at each other for a moment. They were so different. One from one world, the other from another. But then Isabella held out her hand, a wide grin on her face. "Hi, your dad's really cool. He fixes everything that's broken." Julia took the offered hand, laughing. He never fixed anything at our house. I guess he learned here. Mrs. Peterson approached, stronger now, but still moving slowly. She looked at Julia, with that gaze that seemed to see into people's souls. So you're his daughter. I can see you have your father's eyes. Julia smiled. You must be Mrs. Peterson. My dad told me a lot about you. Thank you for taking care of him. The old woman waved her hand, dismissing the thanks. He paid his way. Saved my life when I thought I was a goner. We're even. No, Ryan said firmly. We'll never be even, because you gave me something money can't buy. You gave me a real family. In that moment there in that simple yard with two girls from different worlds starting to talk, with a wise old woman watching, and with a man who had lost everything to find what truly mattered, something magical happened. A bridge was formed, a connection that transcended class, money, or circumstance. The following weeks were a roller coaster of emotions and changes. Melissa and Frank were arrested and held without bail while the case proceeded. The charges were serious: attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. The media covered the story voraciously, and Ryan found himself at the center of a storm of attention he didn't want, but knew was necessary. Julia moved in with him permanently. Ryan rented an apartment in Greenwich Village, smaller than the penthouse but comfortable, and more importantly, it had a guest room that quickly became Isabella's room on weekends when she came to spend time with Julia. The two had become inseparable. Julia taught Isabella about things the girl had never had access to: computers, different languages, art. Isabella taught Julia about things she had never needed to know: real empathy, gratitude for small things, strength in the face of adversity. Mrs. Peterson visited often, always complaining that the apartment was too big and that Ryan was wasting money. But Ryan saw the hidden pride in her eyes as she watched the two girls together, laughing, studying, just being young. It was during one of these visits that Ryan made the announcement he had been planning for weeks. Mrs. Peterson, Isabella, he called them into the living room. I have something to tell you. The two sat down, Isabella curious and Mrs. Peterson suspicious. I've spoken with my lawyers and with the city. I'm starting a project in the community. We're going to renovate the buildings, install proper plumbing and heating, and build a community school. It will take time, but it's going to happen. Isabella jumped up from her chair, her eyes shining. For real, a real school? A real one, with qualified teachers, new books, hot lunches, everything you deserve and never had. Mrs. Peterson discreetly wiped her eyes. You don't have to do this, mister. You've already done too much. Yes, I do. That community saved me. Now it's my turn to give back. And it's not charity, Mrs. Peterson. It's justice. It's giving people the tools they need to build their own lives. Julia came over, placing a hand on her father's shoulder. And I'm going to help. I want to volunteer there, teach what I know, learn what I don't. Ryan looked at his daughter, his heart overflowing with pride. She had changed so much in these few weeks. The distant, phone-obsessed girl had transformed into a conscious, engaged, real young woman. The trial of Melissa and Frank took place 6 months later. Ryan was prepared to testify. He had all the necessary evidence, but in the end, it wasn't needed. The pair, faced with the overwhelming evidence, decided to take a plea deal. They confessed to everything in exchange for reduced sentences. Melissa got 8 years, Frank 10. They both had to pay restitution to Ryan for the damages, but he had already decided that all the money would go to social projects in the community that had taken him in. On the day of the sentencing, Ryan sat in the courtroom with Julia on one side and Dr. Davis on the other. Mrs. Peterson and Isabella were in the back rows, present as silent witnesses to justice being served. When the judge banged the gavel, declaring the final verdict, Ryan didn't feel the satisfaction he expected. There was no joy in the downfall of these two people, even after everything they had done. There was only a sense of closure, of a chapter finally ending. Outside, after the sentencing, reporters surrounded Ryan, wanting a statement. He remained calm and said only what was necessary. Justice has been served, but what really matters isn't their punishment, but what we build from here. I've learned that wealth isn't in bank accounts, but in real human connections, in people who take you in when you have nothing, in love that asks for nothing in return. The following months were a period of intense work. The project in the community began to take shape. Ryan was there every day, supervising construction, talking to residents, listening to their needs. He was no longer the blind millionaire observing from a distance. He was Ryan, the man who understood what it was like to have nothing and therefore valued everything. Mrs. Peterson's apartment was one of the first to be renovated. New rooms, a new roof, proper flooring, a full bathroom. The old woman cried when she saw the result, but they were tears of joy. "You overdid it, mister," she said, running her hand over the smooth painted walls. "It's impossible to overdo it for the person who gave me a second chance at life." The community school opened on a sunny Saturday. Hundreds of people attended. Children ran across the new playground, trying out the equipment Julia had helped pick. Adults toured the classrooms, touching the new desks with reverence. Ryan gave a brief speech, as he was never good with public speaking, but he spoke from the heart. This school represents more than education. It represents hope. It represents the belief that everyone deserves a chance. I got my second chance thanks to the people here. Now I hope this school gives you and your children the chances you deserve. Isabella was one of the first students enrolled. She thrived there, her grades improving, her confidence growing. Julia went every week to help as a volunteer tutor, and the two girls became living examples of how different worlds could not only coexist, but enrich each other. It was on a Sunday, almost a year after he woke up in the dump, that Ryan returned to that place. Not alone. He took Julia, Isabella, and Mrs. Peterson with him. The landfill had been shut down months ago by city order. Now it was a vacant lot covered in weeds, but Ryan knew exactly where he had woken up, the place where his old life ended and his new one began. "It was here," he said, standing on that exact spot. "This is where I woke up, not knowing who I was, not knowing I was about to be saved by a brave little girl." Isabella held his hand. "And this is where I found a friend, someone who needed help." Mrs. Peterson looked around, her face thoughtful. "Places like this shouldn't exist, but if good can come from such a bad place, then maybe there's hope for everything." Julia hugged her father. "You always told me we can't choose what happens to us, but we can choose who we become because of it. I think I finally understand what that means." Ryan looked at the three people around him, his family. Not the family he was born into, but the family he chose, and that chose him back. And he realized Julia was right. He hadn't chosen to be poisoned, to be discarded, to lose his memory, but he had chosen how to react. He had chosen to learn. He had chosen to grow. 6 months later, on a cold January morning, Ryan received unexpected news. Melissa wanted to see him. She had requested a visit at the prison. He hesitated for days before deciding to go. Not for her, but for himself. To completely close that chapter. The visiting room was cold and impersonal. Melissa appeared on the other side of the glass, wearing a prison uniform, her face bare of makeup, her hair pulled back messily. It was a version of Melissa that Ryan had never seen, a human version, vulnerable. They picked up the phones that allowed them to speak through the glass. "Ryan," she began, her voice trembling, "thank you for coming." He just nodded, waiting. "I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I needed you to know I'm sorry, I truly am. Every day in here I think about what I did, the person I became." Ryan studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, but all he saw was genuine remorse. "Why did you do it, Melissa? I gave you everything, I loved you." She wiped away, tears with her hands. "I didn't love you, I never did. I married you for money and status. And the longer it went on, the more I hated myself for it. The more I hated you for making me feel so small. But the problem was never you. It was always me, my greed, my cowardice." Ryan took a deep breath. "You left me in a dump to die. You almost succeeded. If it weren't for a 10-year-old girl, I would have rotted there. I know, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. But I wanted you to know that, in a strange way, you were better to me than I ever was to you. Because after all of this, you still had compassion. You still chose not to completely destroy me when you could have. Ryan was silent for a long moment. I didn't do it for you. I did it for me. Because I learned that holding on to hate only poisons the person holding it. And I've been poisoned once. I'm not going to poison myself with anger. Melissa nodded, the tears now falling freely. You were always better than I deserved, and I hope Julia knows that she has the father I never allowed her to have. She knows, and she's becoming an incredible woman, no thanks to you. The words were harsh but true, and Melissa accepted them without protest. Take care of her, Melissa pleaded, and yourself. Be happy, Ryan, in a way I never could be. Ryan stood up, ready to leave. I already am, he said. I found a real family, people who value me for who I am, not what I have. You'll never understand that, Melissa. But I hope one day you find some peace, and with that he hung up the phone and turned away. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Spring arrived, bringing flowers and renewal. The project in the community had expanded far beyond initial expectations. In addition to the school, there was now a health clinic, a community center, a library. Ryan had invested not just money, but his time and his heart. It was during a party at the school celebrating its first anniversary that something special happened. Ryan was talking with some parents when Mrs. Peterson approached, an envelope in her hand. "This is for you," she said, handing it to him. "What is it?" "Open it." Inside was a drawing by Isabella. It was simple but powerful. It showed a man lying in trash, a little girl reaching out her hand, and then the two of them holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Underneath, in careful letters, it read, "Thank you for showing me that a real hero is someone who gets back up after they fall." Ryan felt his eyes well up. "She drew that herself," Mrs. Peterson said with pride. "Said she wanted you to know that you're her hero, even though you're blind, even though you fell, because you got back up." Ryan couldn't answer. He couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He just hugged the old woman, silently thanking her for everything. Julia came running up, holding a small trophy. "Dad, Isabella won the school's essay contest. She wrote about the day she found you." Ryan looked for Isabella and found her surrounded by friends, her face red with shyness, but beaming with happiness. She looked at him and waved, and Ryan waved back, his heart overflowing. 2 years had passed since that fateful day at the dump. Ryan's life was completely different now. He was still wealthy, he still had his company, but all of that took up a much smaller space in his life. What really mattered were the Friday nights at Mrs. Peterson's, eating rice and beans and talking about everything and nothing. It was the Saturdays at the community school, watching children learn and grow. It was the Sundays with Julia, just enjoying each other's company. Ryan had learned to truly see, despite being blind. He had learned that wealth had nothing to do with money. He had learned that family is who stands by you in the worst of times, not just the best. He had learned that life can knock you down in the dirtiest place on earth, but there's always a chance to start over if you're willing to accept a helping hand. It was on a summer afternoon, walking through what used to be the dump and was now being transformed into a park, that Ryan had a conversation that would sum it all up. A journalist had sought him out for a story. After several questions about the betrayal, the poisoning, the trial, she asked her final question. "After everything you've been through, what would you say is the most important thing you've learned?" Ryan thought for a moment, feeling the warm breeze on his face, hearing the laughter of children playing in the distance. "I've learned that life has a funny way of teaching us what really matters. I had everything, money, status, power, but I was empty. I had to lose it all, be thrown away like trash, wake up not knowing who I was, to finally learn how to truly live. I learned that we are saved not by the wealth we accumulate, but by the love we give and receive. And that family isn't blood, it's choice, it's being there, it's lifting each other up when we fall." The journalist stopped writing, her eyes misty. "That's a beautiful lesson. It's the only one that matters." That night, Ryan was home with Julia Isabella, who was staying over, and Mrs. Peterson, who lately spent more time there than in her own newly renovated apartment. They were all in the living room, watching a movie Isabella had picked. Ryan looked around at the three people who had become his world. Julia, his daughter whom he had gotten back and now truly knew. Isabella, the brave girl who had saved him and whom he was helping to raise. Mrs. Peterson, the wise old woman who had given him shelter and life lessons. And he realized he had found something no amount of money could buy. He had found purpose. He had found true love. He had found peace. The dump where it all began was now almost completely transformed. Trees had been planted. Grass grew green and lush. A colorful playground occupied the space where Ryan had woken up among vultures. Wooden benches offered places to rest. It was as if the land itself was being redeemed, transformed from a place of waste into a place of life. Ryan visited the park often, not for morbid nostalgia, but as a reminder of where he had been, of how low he had fallen, and of how high he had managed to climb again. During one of these visits, accompanied by his granddaughter, a child he never imagined he would have when he was being discarded in that very spot, she asked a simple but profound question. "Grandpa," she said, her small hand in his, "is this where your story changed?" Ryan knelt beside the little girl, touching the grass beneath his feet. The same earth that had been covered in trash now gave life to plants. The same earth where he had nearly died was now a place of joy and new beginnings. "This is where everything ended," he said softly, "and this is where everything began again. Sometimes, my dear, you have to hit rock bottom to understand the value of every step on the way up." The little girl thought for a moment, then hugged her grandfather tightly. "I like this story, because you didn't give up." Ryan held her close, feeling the weight of her words. "No," he said, "I didn't give up. And you know why? Because I had help. I had people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I had love when I thought there was only hate in the world. That's the real lesson, my sweet girl. Nobody saves themselves alone. We save each other." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The children playing in the park were being called home. The day was ending, but softly, beautifully, full of promise full of tomorrow. Ryan stood up, taking his granddaughter's hand. Julia was waiting for them near the park gate, talking with Isabella, who was now in college studying to be a teacher. Mrs. Peterson, even in her 80s, still came sometimes, sitting on the benches and watching life go by. As they walked toward them, Ryan looked back one last time, at the park that was once a dump, at the place where his old life had died and his new one was born. And he smiled, because he finally understood. The wealth he had accumulated before was just that, accumulation. But the wealth he had now was multiplication. Every life he touched through his social projects, every child who learned in the community school, every family that had a better home, every true human connection he made, that was real wealth. The world that had once discarded him was now flourishing around him, and he was flourishing with it. Not as the man he had been, but as the man he had become, a man who knew the value of an outstretched hand, a man who understood that being rescued wasn't weakness, but the deepest form of strength. A man who had been saved not by the fortune he carried, but by the love he found in the most unlikely place in the world. And as the sun set over New York City, over the community that had welcomed him, over the park that symbolized rebirth, Ryan Miller walked home. To his family. To his life. A life worth living. Because in the end, it didn't matter how much money he had in the bank. It mattered how many lives he touched, how many smiles he helped create, how much love he gave and received. And by that measure, Ryan Miller was the richest man in the world. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Ryan, Isabella, and Mrs. Peterson has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of downfall, rescue, and rebirth, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you the most in this story of redemption and true love. Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and remind us that there is always hope even in the most unlikely of places. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on what truly matters in life.